A princely state, also called native state or Indian state, was a nominally sovereign monarchy under a local or regional ruler in a subsidiary alliance with a greater power. Though the history of the princely states of the subcontinent dates from at least the classical period of Indian history, the predominant usage of the term princely state specifically refers to a semi-sovereign principality on the Indian subcontinent during the British Raj that was not directly governed by the British, but rather by a local ruler under a form of indirect rule. Similar political entities also existed on or in the region of the Arabian Peninsula, in Africa and in Malaya, and which were similarly recognized under British rule, subject to a subsidiary alliance and the suzerainty or paramountcy of the British Crown. Oman, Zanzibar and the Trucial states were also under the British Raj, and were administered in the same manner as the Indian princely states as part of the Persian Gulf Presidency. However, they were officially categorized as British protectorates, with differing degrees of autonomy. There were officially 565 princely states in the Indian subcontinent at the time of independence in August 1947, apart from thousands of zamindars and jagirs. The most prominent among those, roughly a quarter of the total, had the status of a salute state, one whose ruler was honored by receiving a set number of gun salutes on ceremonial occasions, ranging from 9 to 21. Rulers of salute states entitled to a gun salute of 11 guns and above received the style of Highness. The Nizam of Hyderabad had the unique style of Exalted Highness. The princely states varied greatly in status, size and wealth. The premier 21-gun salute states of Hyderabad and Jammu and Kashmir were each over 200,000 square kilometers in size, or slightly larger than the whole of Great Britain. In 1941, Hyderabad had a population of over 16 million, comparable to the population of Romania at the time, while Jammu and Kashmir had a population of slightly over 4 million, comparable to that of Switzerland. At the other end of the scale, the non-Salute Principality of Lahore covered an area of 49 square kilometers, or smaller than Bermuda, with a population of just below 3,000. Some 200 of the lesser states had an area of less than 25 square kilometers. At independence, Hyderabad had annual revenues of over Rs. 9 crore, and its own army, airline, telecommunication system, railway, postal system, currency, radio service and a major public university. The tiny state of Lahore had annual revenues of just Rs. 28,000. The era of the princely states effectively ended with Indian independence in 1947. By 1950, almost all of the principalities had acceded to either India or Pakistan, 9 to Pakistan and the rest to India. The accession process was largely peaceful except in the cases of Jammu and Kashmir and Hyderabad, whose ruler opted for total independence in 1947, resulting in the forced annexation of the state to India. As per the terms of accession, the erstwhile Indian princes received privy purses, and were initially allowed to retain their statuses, privileges and autonomy in internal matters during a transitional period which lasted until 1956. During this time, the former princely states were amalgamated into federations. Each federation was headed by a former ruling prince with the title of Raj Pramukh, equivalent to a state governor. In 1956, the position of Raj Pramukh was abolished and the federations dissolved, the former principalities becoming part of Indian states. The states which acceded to Pakistan retained their status until the promulgation of a new constitution in 1956, when they became part of the province of West Pakistan. A few of the former states retained their autonomy until 1969, when they were fully integrated into Pakistan. The Indian government formally de-recognized the princely families in 1971, followed by the government of Pakistan in 1972. History. Though principalities and chiefdoms existed on the Indian subcontinent from at least the Iron Age, the history of princely states on the Indian subcontinent dates to at least the 5th–6th centuries CE. During the rise of the Middle Kingdoms of India following the collapse of the Gupta Empire, many of the future ruling clan groups, notably the Rajputs, began to emerge during this period. By the 13th–14th centuries, many of the Rajput clans had firmly established semi-independent principalities in the northwest, along with several in the northeast. The widespread expansion of Islam during this time brought many principalities into tributary relations with Islamic sultanates, notably the Delhi Sultanate and Bahmana Sultanate. In the south, however, the Hindu Vijayanagara Empire remained dominant until the mid-17th century. Among its tributaries was the future Mysore Kingdom. The Turco-Mongol Mughal Empire brought a majority of the existing Indian kingdoms and principalities under its suzerainty by the 17th century, beginning with its foundation in the early 16th century. The advent of Sikhism resulted in the creation of the Sikh Empire in the north by the early 18th century, by which time the Mughal Empire was in full decline. At the same time, the Marathas carved out their own states to form the Maratha Empire. Through the 18th century, former Mughal governors formed their own independent states. In the northwest, some of those, such as Tonk, allied themselves with various groups, including the Marathas, and the Durrani Empire itself formed in 1747 from a loose agglomeration of tribal chiefdoms that composed former Mughal territories. In 1768, Prithvinarayan Shah, ruler of a small principality in Gorkha, likewise established the Kingdom of Nepal from a federation of small states, expanding its influence over much of northeastern India. In the south, the principalities of Hyderabad and Arcot were fully established by the 1760s, though they nominally remained vassals of the Mughal Emperor. British relationship with the princely states. India under the British Raj consisted of two types of territory: British India and the native states or princely states. In its Interpretation Act 1889, the British Parliament adopted the following definitions. The expression, British India, shall mean all territories and places within Her Majesty's dominions which are for the time being governed by Her Majesty through the Governor-General of India or through any governor or other officer subordinate to the Governor-General of India. The expression, India, shall mean British India together with any territories of any native prince or chief under the suzerainty of Her Majesty, exercised through the Governor-General of India, or through any governor or other officer subordinate to the Governor-General of India. In general, the term, British India, had been used also to refer to the regions under the rule of the East India Company in India from 1774 to 1858. The term has also been used to refer to the British in India. The British Crown's suzerainty over 175 princely states, generally the largest and most important, was exercised in the name of the British Crown by the central government of British India under the Viceroy. The remaining approximately 400 states were influenced by agents answerable to the provincial governments of British India under a governor, lieutenant governor, or chief commissioner. A clear distinction between dominion and suzerainty was supplied by the jurisdiction of the courts of law. The law of British India rested upon the legislation enacted by the British Parliament, and the legislative powers those laws vested in the various governments of British India, both central and local. In contrast, the courts of the princely states existed under the authority of the respective rulers of those states. Princely status and titles. The Indian rulers bore various titles, including Chhatrapati or Badshah, Maharaja or Raja, Raj, Nizam, Wadiyar, Agnaraj, Maharaj for the rulers of Badayan Raj, Nawab, Nayak, Wali, Inamdar, Saranjamdar and many others. whatever the literal meaning and traditional prestige of the ruler's actual title. The British government translated them all as prince, to avoid the implication that the native rulers could be kings, with status equal to that of the British monarch. More prestigious Hindu rulers often used the title Raja, Raj, or a variant such as Rana, Rao, Rawat, or Rawal. Also in this class were several Thakurs or Thakurs and a few particular titles, such as Sardar, Mankari, Deshmukh, Sardesai, Raja and Amdar, Saranjamdar. The most prestigious Hindu rulers usually had the prefix Maha in their titles, as in Maharaja, Maharana, Maharao, etc. The states of Travancore and Kochi had queens regnant styled Maharani. Generally the female forms applied only to sisters, spouses and widows, who could however act as regents. There were also compound titles, such as Rajadaraj, Raja Rajgan, often relics from an elaborate system of hierarchical titles under the Mughal emperors. For example, the addition of the adjective Bahadur raised the status of the title holder one level. Furthermore, most dynasties used a variety of additional titles, such as Varma in South India. This should not be confused with various titles and suffixes not specific to princes but used by entire castes. The Sikh princes concentrated at Punjab usually adopted Hindu-type titles when attaining princely rank. At a lower level Sardar was used. Muslim rulers almost all used the title Nawab, with the prominent exceptions of the Nizam of Hyderabad and Barer, the Wali Khan of Kalat and the Wali of Swat. Other less usual titles included Darbar Sahib, Juan, Jam, Mata Amir, precedence and prestige. However, the actual importance of a princely state cannot be read from the title of its ruler, which was usually granted as a favor, often in recognition for loyalty and services rendered to the Mughal Empire. Although some titles were raised once or even repeatedly, there was no automatic updating when a state gained or lost real power. In fact, princely titles were even awarded to holders of domains and even zamindars, which were not states at all. Various sources give significantly different numbers of states and domains of the various types. Even in general, the definition of titles and domains are clearly not well established. In addition to their titles, all princely rulers were eligible to be appointed to certain British orders of chivalry associated with India. The most exalted Order of the Star of India and the most eminent Order of the Indian Empire. Women could be appointed as knights of these orders. Rulers entitled to 21-gun and 19-gun salutes were normally appointed to the highest rank, Knight Grand Commander of the Order of the Star of India. Many Indian princes served in the British Army, the Indian Army, or in local guard or police forces, often rising to high ranks. Some even served while on the throne. Many of these were appointed as an aide-de-camp, either to the ruling prince of their own house or indeed to the British King-Emperor. Many saw active service both on the subcontinent and on other fronts, during both world wars. Apart from those members of the princely houses who entered military service and who distinguished themselves, a good number of princes received honorary ranks as officers in the British and Indian armed forces. Those ranks were conferred based on several factors, including their heritage, lineage, gun salute as well as personal character or martial traditions. After the First and Second World Wars, the princely rulers of several of the major states, including Gwalior, Patiala, Bikaner, Jaipur, Jodhpur, Jammu and Kashmir and Hyderabad, were given honorary general officer ranks as a result of their states' contributions to the war effort. Lieutenant, Captain, Flight Lieutenant or Lieutenant Commander, Major, Squadron Leader, Commander, Lieutenant Colonel, Wing Commander or Captain, Colonel, Group Captain, Commodore, Brigadier, Air Commodore, Major General, Air Vice Marshal, Lieutenant General, General. It was also not unusual for members of princely houses to be appointed to various colonial offices, often far from their native state. or to enter the diplomatic corps. Salute states. The gun salute system was used to set unambiguously the precedence of the major rulers in the area in which the British East India Company was active, or generally of the states and their dynasties. As heads of a state, certain princely rulers were entitled to be saluted by the firing of an odd number of guns between 3 and 21. with a greater number of guns indicating greater prestige. Generally, the number of guns remained the same for all successive rulers of a particular state, but individual princes were sometimes granted additional guns on a personal basis. Furthermore, rulers were sometimes granted additional gun salutes within their own territories only, constituting a semi-promotion. The states of all these rulers were known as salute states. After Indian independence, the Maharana of Udaipur displaced the Nizam of Hyderabad as the most senior prince in India. Because Hyderabad state had not acceded to the new dominion of India, and the style highness was extended to all rulers entitled to 9-gun salutes. When the princely states had been integrated into the Indian Union, their rulers were promised continued privileges and an income for their upkeep. Subsequently, when the Indian government abolished the Privy Purse in 1971, the whole princely order ceased to be recognized under Indian law. Although many families continue to retain their social prestige and formally, some descendants of the rulers are still prominent in regional or national politics, diplomacy, business and high society. At the time of Indian independence, only 5 rulers, the Nizam of Hyderabad, the Maharaja of Mysore, the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir state, the Maharaja Gakwade of Baroda and the Maharaja Scindia of Gwalior, were entitled to a 21-gun salute. 5 more, the Nawab of Bhopal, the Maharaja Holkar of Indore, the Maharana of Udaipur, the Maharaja of Kohapur and the Maharaja of Travancore, were entitled to 19-gun salutes. The most senior princely ruler was the Nizam of Hyderabad, who was entitled to the unique style Exalted Highness. Other princely rulers entitled to salutes of 11 guns or more were entitled to the style Highness. No special style was used by rulers entitled to lesser gun salutes. As paramount ruler, and successor to the Mughals, the British King Emperor of India, for whom the style of majesty was reserved, was entitled to an imperial 101-gun salute. In the European tradition also the number of guns fired to announce the birth of an heir to the throne. Non-salute states there was no strict correlation between the levels of the titles and the classes of gun salutes, the real measure of precedence, but merely a growing percentage of higher titles in classes with more guns. As a rule, the majority of gun salute princes had at least 9, with numbers below that usually the prerogative of Arab sheikhs of the Aden Protectorate. Also under British protection, there were many so-called non-salute states of lower prestige. Since the total of salute states was 117 and there were more than 500 princely states, most rulers were not entitled to any gun salute. Among these, not all of them were minor rulers. The Maharaja of Surguja, for example, was ruling over a large territory, but was not entitled to any gun salute. A number of princes, in the broadest sense of the term, were not even acknowledged as such. On the other hand, the dynasties of certain defunct states were allowed to keep their princely status. They were known as political pensioners, such as the Nawab of Oudh. There were also certain estates of British India which were rendered as political saranjams, having equal princely status. Though none of these princes were awarded gun salutes, princely titles in this category were recognized as a form of vassals of salute states, and were not even in direct relation with the paramount power. Doctrine of Lapse. A controversial aspect of East India Company rule was the Doctrine of Lapse, a policy under which lands whose feudal ruler died without a male biological heir would become directly controlled by the company and an adopted son would not become the ruler of the princely state. This policy went counter to Indian tradition where, unlike Europe, it was far more the accepted norm for a ruler to appoint his own heir. The doctrine of lapse was pursued most vigorously by the Governor-General Sir James Ramsay, 10th Earl of Dalhousie. Dalhousie annexed 7 states, including Awadh, whose Nawabs he had accused of misrule, and the Maratha states of Nagpur, Jhansi and Satara, and Sambalpur. Resentment over the annexation of these states turned to indignation when the heirlooms of the Maharajas of Nagpur were auctioned off in Calcutta. Dalhousie's actions contributed to the rising discontent amongst the upper castes, which played a large part in the outbreak of the Indian Mutiny of 1857. The last Mughal Badshah, whom many of the mutineers saw as a figurehead to rally around, was deposed following its suppression. In response to the unpopularity of the doctrine, it was discontinued with the end of company rule and the British Parliament's assumption of direct power over India.